Washington University and KETC present Science and Human Responsibility, a conference called at Washington University in St. Louis to bring together men of thought from all parts of the world. These men are searching for answers to the problems that face us and for the best ways to use the opportunities that are ours in this scientific age. With Dr. Houston Smith, who is your representative in questioning the conferees.
This is a little mechanical robo, a rather charming and appealing one, it seems to me. I was just operating it through this battery that I'm holding in my hand. Now, it may seem like a far cry from a little tin robo of that type to a human being, and yet there's been a suspicion abroad in the minds of man for some time that actually the distance might be simply one of degree. With the fantastic advance of modern science in discovering the lawfulness of nature, many have suggested, and many more have felt, that actually man might be simply a very complicated kind of robo, as completely enmeshed and determined by laws of nature as a model of this sort. Now, is that so? Is this what science is really saying? Well, I, on this program, am your questioner, here to try to ask the questions which I think you might want to ask if you were in my shoes. And tonight, this is the question before us: whether in our consideration of science and human responsibility, man is free to work out his destiny, and what science is saying about this issue of human freedom. In our studio this evening, we have with us Arthur Compton, who is the Nobel Prize-winning physicist and professor, distinguished service professor of natural philosophy at Washington University. His latest book, Atomic Quest, has just come out this last week. In it, he gives a personal narrative of the sequence of events leading to the atomic bomb. But our topic this evening, Mr. Compton, is this question of human freedom and what science really is saying with regard to this issue. And let me begin by asking you what you feel really is at stake in this issue. Why do you feel personally, as I happen to know from some of your writings, you do feel that this is an important issue?
I'm interested, Houston Smith, in that little robot that you showed us over there. And let me tell a story which I think illustrates what's at stake as well as anything that I can say. It's the old Greek story that Plato told of Socrates being free when he drank the hemlock. The story goes something like this. Socrates had been condemned by the people of Athens for leading astray their youth. He was in prison. A kindly jailer had left the door unlocked, and his disciples were around him and urged Socrates to run away. And Socrates, very calmly, went at it somewhat like this. He said, "When I was a young man, I read a physics book by a man by the name of Anaxagoras. And Anaxagoras would have me believe that I'm seated here on this cot because of the tensions of the tendons over my joints. What Anaxagoras doesn't seem to know is that I'm seated here because the people of Athens have determined that I should die. And being a man who's loyal to Athens, I can't sneak stealthily away. After all, I'm a man of honor." Now, one might criticize his logic a little, but it was a very effective argument. It wasn't the physics that kept him there. It was because he was a man of honor. It was on a different level. Now, that really is one answer to this question that you ask. What is it that's at stake? Is man human? And I suppose that everyone inside of him feels he can do things. But at the same time, if all logic and reason says to him, you're just a machine, it takes away a good deal of his feeling of self-respect, of his feeling of dignity of the man. What it ought to do logically is to tell him that he shouldn't try, that it's not worth the effort to do anything. Practically, I doubt if there's anybody who really takes it as seriously as that, although some people get rather worried, I find, that they are caught in a net that they can do nothing about. But I think the thing that is really at stake is deeper than that. It is a person's self-respect. Is he just a machine? And actually, of course, man's a part of nature, but he's a very distinctive part of nature. He's the part of nature that thinks and feels, is aware of things, and that can actually take hold of things and shape them to his needs. That is, if he loses that, then he feels he's no longer a man.
If we take the values here then as the sense of real alternatives and the sense that the individual can choose between these alternatives, that much would the determinist view in a sophisticated sense also have room for? I'm thinking, for example, of communists or materialists who might say that man is determined, and yet they certainly live as though they had decisions to make, and that it is important for them to make these decisions?
I think every practical man, when he does something, feels that he must try, that it's worth the effort. And those who are philosophically what we would call determinists, that is, they think of themselves as machines following definite laws, they will nevertheless, in practical action, use the best techniques, including thought. Thought control is one of these things. Brainwashing. You asked about the communist. Yes, but I think the real practical effect shows itself in a different way. If a person thinks of himself and of other persons as machines, he will say, well, what is my value? What is my usefulness, or the usefulness of the other person? He's more apt to think of the other person of a machine than himself, and he will use him as a machine. And his value is rated as to, shall we say, how useful is he to the state, rather than some inherent value that the man has because of his own inherent dignity. And there, I think, you see a very basic difference between the democratic man who believes in freedom and the person who, on the contrary, feels that a man is useful to be used toward the ends that he may think are of value to something greater than man.
What now is science? What has science been saying that has bearing upon this issue?
I noted Socrates. That shows that the idea that man is a machine goes way back, 2,500 years more or less. But science, in the meantime, has had its ups and downs. It was during the period of, shall we say, from the 17th through the 19th centuries, from the time of Galileo on down until really the present century, that science developed a completely deterministic kind of idea. This was based primarily on, not on the idea of any compulsion. That was an older kind of anthropomorphic idea of force, but rather that things happened in inevitable course. Let me go over here to this table and show a couple of examples that I have here. In the first place, here is a pendulum. That pendulum, swinging back and forth, is an example of something follows a regular motion. And this was analogous to the motion of the planets around the sun. And when it was found that in terms of simple dynamics and the law of gravitation and so on, it was possible to have the motion of the planets explained. Well, this made people think that the world was following definite courses. But not everything works that way. Do you have a wristwatch there? I want a wristwatch with a radium dial on it, and my reason is to get the radium. I have here, I had this in mind before, of course. Here is a Geiger counter, and this Geiger counter is something that will respond to radium, at least if it's working the way it's supposed to work. And I see we've got it now.
Is that red one on? Is it?
Yeah. I put that watch there. There are some atoms of helium, alpha particles, coming from the radium that is in that dial. Now, you try to predict when the next pop is going to come, that this is counting. The fact is that it's unpredictable, exactly. It follows a statistical law. Now and then one will go off. For a radium atom, it has a chance of about 1 in 1,000, 1 in 2,000 that it'll go off in any 1 year. And there are lots of radium atoms in the dial of that watch, so that you have a good many of them coming off here in a minute. But that is quite different from this phenomenon here, where you can time it regularly. That is not timed regularly. Here is something in which, in 1,000 years, the number coming from this dial will be about the same as another 1,000 years. But in a tenth of a second, is it going to go off that tenth of a second, or isn't it? You don't know. Now, this is typical of what has happened during the past century in physics.
Yes, but when you say you don't know, is this any evidence that it is not determined? What it suggests to me is that maybe you just don't know enough about those alpha particles. They're a lot smaller than this pendulum, and isn't it simply a matter of human ignorance rather than any genuine freedom on the part of the particles?
I wouldn't speak of freedom on the part of the particles. So far as this is concerned, it's just a matter of chance. But when you ask, is it just a failure, a lack of our information? This is the thing which has been a matter of very careful study. I wish I had time to go into it, but I can't. All that I can say is that the best of our physical knowledge now is that it is inherent in nature that it is impossible to make prediction on the basis of any kind of available information. As a matter of fact, this is a matter that has been under discussion among physicists, in which during the last couple of decades there have been two sides. The side feeling that maybe you might get further information that could, in principle at least, predict when these things are going to happen, has just about given up the struggle now. The last one that I found to give up that position was Louis de Broglie, who wrote his book on physics and microphysics, just published this year, in which he has now gone to the side that it is completely a matter of a chance, inherent chance, that is, not something that is a failure to measure, but that in the very essence of it, it is one of these things in which alternatives are really possible. This idea came from the result of experiments some 30 years ago, in which it became apparent that no physical kind of instrument would be able to get the information necessary to make these predictions. Now, recently, there have been developments which make it even more basic than that. Not only that you can't make observations, but that the very character of the events are is such that you can't make these predictions.
Can I just state this, because this seems to be really a crucial point in the discussion. It is not then, this is at least according to the majority opinion in physics, this unpredictability is not inherently a matter, a limitation of human knowledge, but rather, even if we had, is it appropriate to say, a God's eye view, so that we knew everything about what had led up to this moment, it would still be impossible.
The God's eye view goes a little far, though I would say that that would be consistent with the most recent thinking along this line. The trend is all in that direction. But I must call attention to the fact that there are two different kinds of things. One is predictable. Your pendulum was predictable.
Yes.
Your radium was not. Your radium was one atom at a time. Your pendulum has many atoms at a time. This is a large-scale event, like your robo that you had there. That was a large-scale event. You could predict what was going to happen, the motion of the planets. But there is another kind of large-scale event that is completely a matter of chance, and that is the one that depends at some stage on an event like this. I suppose the most familiar, the thing that you talk most about of that kind would be the explosion of atomic bomb. That's set off by a radium atom or a radioactive atom that goes off at just the right instant to make the atomic bomb explode. Well, now, if you only had one or two atoms that would probably go off in that fraction of a microsecond, then you wouldn't be sure that the bomb was going to explode. You have 1,000 of them, more or less, that will go off in that instant, and then you know it's a surefire affair. But if you had only one or two, you might have even chances that the bomb would explode. And that would be just as uncertain, though it's a very large-scale event, as this is.
So this means that just because a thing is big, this doesn't mean it's necessarily predictable.
Precisely true. And that applies to all kinds of molecular actions. I have here, for example, a photographic negative. It has in it silver bromide that has been exposed to light and then developed. Now, here is a part of it that maybe 1 in 10 of the grains have thus been developed. But all of the grains were exposed to the same light, and the chance was 1 in 10. It's in principle impossible to predict which one of those 10 is going to be developable. It's very much the same kind of thing. The living organisms, it's generally believed, at least very widely believed, that these events that have to do with life are likewise these multiple scale things.
Well, you've spoken of chance here, and I'm not sure that that's very reassuring to me as a human being, because chance really doesn't sound any more compatible with responsibility than, shall we say, ironclad determinism.
No, and that is as far as one can go with physics. But here is freedom, so far as we know it, is not physics at all. Science hasn't, so far as I can see, anything to do with it. As I see freedom, it is something that is within myself, and I know it because things happen frequently as I want them to. I go out here and pick this up. It is something that I have done, I feel, of my own volition. Was that chance? No, it was because I intended to do it. Now, that is something that is within me. If you look at me from the outside, yes, this motion of my hand over there obeyed the laws of physics. But that's all you can tell as physical observation. But from within, I sense that I do it as I wish. And that is the sense of freedom. The freedom is something internal. And so this is something that is added to your physical knowledge, as I see it.
Yes, when you say then that man is not determined, you are speaking at this moment as a physicist, and saying that the action that goes on in his molecules...
You came here and joined me here this evening. How did you know I was going to be here?
Well, I suppose because you're an honorable man, if we go back to Socrates, you generally keep your appointment.
It was not because of the physics of the case. I could have been here, and I could have or not have been here.
But now, what of the psychologists who might bring matters of social conditioning, and maybe your mother taught you to fulfill your obligations? What would you say on the psychological level?
Well, I must say, I think it is only fair to say that if one examines this question as to whether man is a robot from the point of view of the scientists, by no means all scientists are agreed. It's rather interesting to find that, as far as I know, there is no physicist, I don't know of any, who would take the position that man inevitably does the things he does. But I can find anthropologists and psychologists in large numbers who take that position. And I think, I can't speak firmly, but I believe this is usually because they are aware of the psychological pressures that make the tendency to do certain types of acts strong. And these would be the conditioning processes that you're referring to. As I look at it as a physicist, that is merely a shifting of the action of a spectrum of probability. And it remains possible to select, for the individual to select from within that spectrum of action possibility the thing which he will do. But this kind of determinism that my psychological friends speak of refers to a shift of that spectrum from leaving some things practically impossible to perform.
In other words, if a man is psychologically determined, at least this determinism acts upon him by way of alternative courses of action that he envisions and his entertainment of those. And in that sense, since there is a balance, or not necessarily a balance, but at least an alternative course of action which he envisions and decides in favor of, this comes close to freedom?
That psychological determinism is difficult for me to distinguish from freedom. In fact, I'm not sure that there is any difference there. What I find is that it becomes so certain from to the scientist that the physical conditions are not adequate to determine one's position, that I have within myself just forgotten that this is a serious problem. As a matter of fact, it is no longer serious with me. And
what is serious?
I begin to feel that I want to look and see what the possibilities are and make the best of those possibilities. And that seems to me to be the serious problem as a scientist. What I realize is that there are now much greater variety of possibilities before us than there were before. And I feel that it is increasingly important that we select the right possibility. I no longer question that selection is something that one can do. I know that it can be done.
In other words, science is not only not putting any barrier or casting any doubt in your mind on the fact that we are free and we need to make our decisions, but it is actually enlarging our freedom by stretching the distance between the alternatives which we can choose.
Absolutely.
Is that so?
I would give us a couple of examples of that. Now, the energy of the atomic bomb, the possibility to control life and health and so on. These are enormously important things that have come as a result of the growth of science. And our responsibility for making the choices in the use of these powers becomes enormously great. Now, that seems to me to be the serious thing.
The serious thing. Maybe never have a people before had such freedom as we have today.
And of course, with that freedom comes a correspondingly great responsibility, and that sometimes weighs down on us.
Yes.
It should.
Yes. Well, I'm sure that's true. I would like, if I might, to I've been serving as the questioner. I've gotten some answers, I think, to summarize these answers as they've come through to me while you're here, so that you can tell me whether you think this is in accord with your thoughts on these issues. As I've listened to you talk, seems to me I've gathered these things. First, that when science speaks of law, they're not really thinking of compulsion in the sense, you might say, of streetcar tracks which force the streetcar to go in one direction. It's more descriptive. It's more like following the route of a bus line and saying this is the way it does go, rather than any feeling of compulsion on it.
I would agree with that
Agree
completely.
with that.
It's not compulsion. It is, this is the way it
Descriptive
does,
rather than prescriptive.
This is.
This is the way it does. All right. That in the past, science has, there was a period in which it suggested that this description might be tightened up to the point where we would know, if we knew all the events coming up to a certain point, we could know exactly which way things would go. Now, not only have we abandoned this vision, this possibility, but really the reason, you say, the dominant school in physics is saying, is not because of limitation of our knowledge, but because there is an inherent chance or randomness in nature. That would be
yes,
valid?
so that there is really just no evidence for the deterministic mechanism.
And you have been speaking of the relation of physics to this matter of freedom, and leaving really for Mr. Frome and some of the others the question of the scientific, of the psychological and social aspects of the problem.
That is true. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Compton. We might come back in closing to the question posed by our little man here, the robo. We're left with two views, the man of the statue, the man of the mechanical model, and as I've listened to Mr. Compton speak, it has seemed to me that he is saying that man's picture, man's situation is more accurately described by the statue than by the robo.
This has been Science and Human Responsibility with Dr. Houston Smith. Appearing on this program with Dr. Smith tonight was Dr. Arthur H. Compton, physicist and professor of natural philosophy at Washington University. For further information and study of the subjects discussed on tonight's program, we recommend that you read The Human Meaning of Science by Dr. Arthur H. Compton, Quantum Theory by David Bohm, and What is Life by Erwin Schrödinger. This is National Educational Television.